Did you know that if you had $100 in 1913 today, you would need over $2,600 to have the same purchasing power? This surprising fact is a result of a phenomenon we call inflation. Inflation, in its simplest terms, is the general increase in prices and fall in the purchasing value of money. It's like a hidden force that subtly erodes your purchasing power over time. But don't be too alarmed, inflation is a normal part of a healthy economy. In fact, moderate inflation can stimulate spending, encouraging economic growth. However, it's not always rainbows and sunshine. High inflation can be harmful, causing instability and uncertainty. It's a delicate balance that needs to be maintained. Now you might be thinking, how bad can inflation really get? Well, let's travel to 20th century Germany to find out. In the early 1920s, Germany experienced what is possibly the most severe case of hyperinflation in history. It was a time of turmoil, known as the Weimar Republic era, following the devastating World War I. The war had left the country in tatters, both physically and economically. Germany was saddled with massive war debts, and the government decided on a seemingly simple solution: print more money. However, the consequences of this decision were far from simple. The more money they printed, the less it was worth. This is a basic principle of economics. When supply exceeds demand, value drops. The German government continued to print money, and as they did, the rate of inflation skyrocketed. Money was losing its value so quickly that prices were literally changing by the hour. People were carrying around wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. Workers were paid twice a day because, by the time they finished their shift, the money they'd been paid at the start would have lost half its value. This was a classic case of hyperinflation, where the inflation rate is so high that the normal functioning of the economy is impossible. It's like a car engine overheating. If it gets too hot, it will simply stop working. This period of hyperinflation left a deep scar on the German economy and its people. The middle class, who had their savings in cash, saw their wealth evaporate overnight. The economy was in ruins, and the social fabric was stretched to breaking point. The tale of the Weimar Republic is a stark reminder of what can happen when inflation is left unchecked. It shows us the importance of sound monetary policy and the need for governments to balance their books. It's a cautionary tale that economists and policymakers refer to, even to this day, when discussing the potential risks of high inflation. At its peak, prices were doubling every 3.7 days in Germany. Now that's hyperinflation. So we've seen how extreme inflation can be disastrous, but what about the everyday impact of inflation on our economy? Inflation, in its simplest form, is just the rise in the general level of prices over time. But it's a little like a ripple in a pond. It affects more than just the cost of your morning cup of coffee. Take employment, for instance. When prices rise, businesses have to pay more for raw materials and wages. If they can't pass these costs on to their customers, they may have to cut back on hiring or even lay off workers. That's why higher inflation can sometimes lead to higher unemployment. Now let's talk about investment. Inflation erodes the value of money. So if you're saving or investing, you need to earn a return that's higher than the rate of inflation just to maintain your purchasing power. This can encourage risk-taking as investors seek out higher returns. But it can also discourage investment if the returns are not high enough to compensate for inflation. What about economic growth? Well, mild inflation is actually seen as a sign of a healthy economy. It suggests that demand for goods and services is strong, which can drive economic growth. But too much inflation can be harmful. It creates uncertainty, which can make businesses and consumers hesitant to spend and invest. This is where central banks come in. They use monetary policy to try to keep inflation at a stable, predictable level. They do this by adjusting interest rates and controlling the supply of money in the economy. On the flip side, deflation, or negative inflation, can also be a problem. It can lead to a vicious cycle where people delay spending because they expect prices to fall, which in turn leads to further price falls and economic stagnation. Inflation, like many things in life, can be a friend or a foe. It all depends on how well we understand and manage it. Inflation is often called the invisible thief, silently eroding the value of our money over time. It's a subtle force, quietly working in the background, yet its effects are pervasive, impacting everything from the price of your morning coffee to the global economy. Remember the story of Germany? A stark reminder that unchecked inflation can lead to hyperinflation and severe economic instability. It's a cautionary tale that underscores the importance of managing inflation effectively. Inflation doesn't just affect nations, it affects individuals too. It can eat into your savings, decrease your purchasing power, and make planning for the future more challenging. That's why understanding inflation is crucial, not just for economists and policymakers, but for everyone. Next time you notice the price of your favorite coffee has gone up, remember the invisible thief, inflation. And remember, knowledge is power. So, keep learning and keep growing.